Thank you, guys. I'm excited to tell you guys a story today. And that story is not different from probably stories that most of you have heard here in Iowa. It's a story of tragedy, of loss, of beauty, and of science and of hope. So, like Laura said and Travis said, my name is Jeremy French. I get to direct all the restoration and stewardship for the Southeastern Grasslands Institute based out of Austin Peay State University. And what that means is I have a lot of sleepless nights worried about restoration across 24 states. We currently have a staff of about 30 people, all who I get to work alongside and lead a lot of large-scale restoration projects. I can't really tell the story of Southeastern Grasslands without mentioning this next slide. The myth of the squirrel, one of the many things that keep me up at night. So I grew up in southern Florida. I was played in the Everglades, spent a lot of times in the prairie out there. I didn't even know what they were. I was just out there all the time. And all through grade school in Florida, we were taught this thing that outside of Florida, pre-European settlement, that everything in the Southeast was one giant deciduous forest. So much so that all these old growth forests, like the picture on the left, came together that a squirrel could go, a very motivated squirrel, could go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River without ever touching the ground. And this thought is not only a myth predicated by my history and biology teachers, it's a common thought and thread in the scientific community even today. That the eastern United States is a giant, deciduous hardwood forest. And I'm here to tell you that is wrong and that is a myth. The story of these southeastern grasslands have never been told. Here we have in the Shenandoah Valley a virgin prairie. You can see all the liatris species blooming there. And not only never told from a scientific perspective or a restoration perspective, but seldom told from a cultural perspective. We can see the evidence of the scientific community not understanding eastern grasslands by this map here, published by DeSelm and Murdoch in 1993. The black areas are the only areas that they have mapped out as potential grasslands. You have the Pennyroyal Plain in Kentucky, the Blackland Prairie or the Black Belt Prairie through Mississippi, Alabama, some dry prairies in Florida, a little bit in Texas and Arkansas. That is published as of 1993, and this map is still being published today. And then you have what SGI has worked, or Southeastern Grassland Institute has worked to publish and will be published in Nat Geo this year. You have the true map of Southeastern Grasslands. And these two maps tell very different stories. The one on the left tells a story of not understanding how fastly we lost these prairies and savannas upon settlement. And the one on the right is the result of extensive scientific, botanic, and cultural research. We had in the Southeast over 300 million acres of tall grass prairie, savannas, and woodlands that were expansive. Most of you are probably familiar with slides like this. When people think of grasslands, most people think of grasslands to the west of the dry line. Everything to the east of that line receives enough rainfall that it wants to be a forest or it wants to have woody growth. I think of Tom Rosberg talking about not knowing how many woody shrubs or trees he's cut down. That is because everything to the east of that receives enough moisture to support that kind of community. So when we're talking about 300 million acres of grassland, these grasslands were maintained by something else. So pretty prototypical Western grassland. We all love them. Beautiful, nice rolling hills. This is what we're taught the East should look like, a nice mesic hardwood old growth forest. This is what it really should look like. This is Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, one of the last savannas of its kind left. Those are shortleaf pine in the background there, and this is a shortleaf pine post oak, blackjack oak savanna. So if there's enough water, what maintains these grasslands, or what maintain them? Well, a primary element of these grasslands is and was fire. Bison played a huge role in the grasslands of the Southeast. We had herds from Florida north to New York, all throughout the East. And most people, this is a contentious discussion about how big those herds were or what they were doing. Well, I can tell you we have plant species in the East that evolved alongside bison grazing, like Paysonia perforata, that only exists now in 5 locations in the world. Beavers played an extensive role in southeastern grasslands by flooding out valley bottoms and creating meadows and lush prairies. We have a lot of edaphic conditions in the Southeast. These are grasslands that the soil is so volatile at times that it does not allow for tree growth. Think of these as our barrens and our glades, not too similar than some of our goat prairies of northeast Iowa. We have these really unique river scour grasslands that support species like big bluestem in these river bottoms that are maintained by seasonal flooding. So the floods come and they rip away all the woody vegetation, and then you'll walk out on these gravel bars and there's big bluestem and little bluestem and silphiums blooming. Really neat stuff that tells a story. These grasslands were maintained by Native Americans. These grasslands were so much a part of their life that I was speaking to my friend who is Choctaw from Mississippi, who now lives in Oklahoma. And they have an origin story talking about hunting Pleistocene megafauna on the grasslands of Mississippi and Arkansas and Alabama. These very grasslands are at the root and the core of what it means to have settled the East. But we didn't only have human or anthropogenic fire. Some of the biggest grassland detractors out there will say, oh, well, you had 3 million acres of prairie in Kentucky only because of humans. And that's not true. If you look on the left here, we have a map of air to ground lightning strikes. These are the type of lightning strikes that create ignition points that would have burned these prairies and savannas. The late, great E.O. Wilson said it best, and he supplied the foreword to my colleague and good friend Reed Noss's book called Forgotten Grasslands of the Southeast. And he says, the southern grassland biome, when it is properly defined to include the long-leaf pine savanna, is probably the richest terrestrial biome in North America. To understand, cherish, and preserve the great natural heritage of the southern grassland biome should be a priority goal in environmental movements in America. I say this, and 10 years ago, if I was standing up here talking about grasslands not in the Midwest, people would look at me and say, what do you mean grasslands? There's no grasslands in the Southeast. So I'm here to tell you again, yes, there are, and there were. How do we know that? Well, I've always got to show this map. It's a French map. My name is Jeremy French, so it gets to go first. But this is from 1720. I'll orient you here. You can see the northern panhandle of Florida into the Carolinas. The top of the map is Tennessee and Kentucky and Alabama and Mississippi. And understand that early pioneers didn't have Google Earth, so when they were drawing, the scale of these things are a little wonky at times. But we'll see here. The French mapped this as savanna. They mapped this as all level and good ground, meaning prairie. Savanna. Good pasture ground, again, meaning prairie. Here's another map from 1680. Again, you can tell no Google Earth yet. More mapped grasslands. Here's another one. This goes all the way up until Pennsylvania from Fry and Jefferson in 1751. More grasslands. It's not only historical stuff and historical map and scientific literature that we can refer to. There's important cultural literature out there too. Like this quote from 1822 that talks about coming into the Black Belt Prairie and seeing this expanse of thousands of acres of prairies, which is now called, there's a little landowner that has part of this prairie left. It's the only pocket left called Wild Horse Prairie. We're out in Texas, Ferdinand Romer in 1849, talking about, again, the prairies and how they compared to a park-like stature. We have Audubon, who moved to Kentucky in 1806, talking about how there were so many prairie chickens in the area that they were looked like as crows, and that in one day they shot upward of 40, and that they were so satiated with prairie chicken meat that they just left them lie. They were tired of it, sick of it. Georgia, House of Commons, 1759, tries to pass a law banning bison hunting. Unfortunately, they failed. Daniel Boone comes across the Cumberland Gap, 1775, and he writes back to the States at that time and says, I've come across these bison, and the bison are more plentiful than what I've ever seen back of cattle in the estates. And these vast plains and barrens seems to stretch on forever. He's talking about prairies and bison in Kentucky. George Washington, we all love George Washington, right? He's never told a lie. West Virginia, he writes after killing 5 bison in West Virginia. I love the way they wrote back then. This country abounds in buffalo and wild game and all kinds of fowl. We had bison in West Virginia, and some people would say, oh, they were just forest bison. Those people don't understand the ecology and the botanic context of these ecosystems. These bison were not browsing in old growth forests or shrubs. They were eating all the McGregor's wild rye and these species of lush grasses, not only in the savannas, but the open woodlands of the time. Then you have Arkansas, talking about in the history of Washington County, talking about how so soon after settlement that these prairies and savannas started shifting. They were changing before they could be studied. The person who wrote this is not a scientist. And they made the observation that when they settled, and Washington County was settled, it was sparse and prairie-like and had savannas, and in a short period, it was gone. And then you can't forget New York, Long Island, and the extinct heath hen that they attempted to protect. This heath hen was a subspecies of prairie chickens that is now extinct, that had thousands and thousands of acres of prairie to call its home, and it was quickly overhunted. And by the time they tried to protect it and move it to a preserve on Martha's Vineyard, eventually it died. The last one known was named Booming Ben, and it got its name because it was a sad, lonely male that died alone. We can talk about the Carolinas. Here's another quote describing how upon settlement, it was savanna and prairie-like, with seldom houses out on the prairies. And then by the time just few years passed, they had exhausted that resource. So we have all this evidence for what should be there, what it was like, and I think I've got you convinced that grasslands exist in the Southeast, but if I haven't, I still got like 20 more minutes. This is what the Southeast was. The Southern Serengeti. 300+ million acres of prairie and savanna, and yes, some forests. Some of these grasslands have declined by 90%. The majority are similar to Iowa's tall grass prairie in that they have less than 1% left. Many of the pictures you'll see in these slideshows, they are the last standing examples of these grassland systems. Like this remnant in Cades Cove and Great Smoky Mountain National Park. They come in all sizes. They're huge prairies. But we also have these small sandstone barrens, like in the Ouachitas in Arkansas, that are not too different to me than the goat prairies of Northeast Iowa and Wisconsin. We have giant, vast prairies, or had them. Florida is the holdout for most of these prairies, but giant expanses of grasses. And many people will look at these and instantly see all the palms and stuff like that. But what I want you to look closer is that in the background, that is Indian grass and big blue stem and andropogons. These are prairies, not unlike the prairies that we have here, just more diverse. And then some types of them had old growth trees on them. These trees here from Roanoke, Virginia, are hundreds of years old that are just slowly growing because of the return of fire and the edaphic conditions of the soil. We had ancient communities that were likely holdovers from before the Pleistocene in these mountain balds that were entirely grazing maintained. And let me tell you, they are really tough and interesting to restore. They include a wide variety of wetland habitats like this mountain bog, and desert-like environments like these limestone glades. I despise showing this picture sometimes because as a restoration ecologist, it frustrates me. Because what we see in the Southeast is you see this glade here. All this shallow exposed soil is really great. We get a lot of really interesting annuals and desert-like species in the glade proper. But if you look to the top of that photo, you see this hard wall of trees and shrubbery that is not natural. These glades are supposed to be set in a oak savanna, pine savanna type system. And all that we have left is the rocky areas that are too shallow and too mean for trees. We also had millions of acres of our native bamboos. I don't know if anybody's a botany enthusiast, but likely, I have this on good authority, we probably have 8 species of native bamboo in the country. Only 4 of them are currently named as distinct. One of those was just named last year by a buddy of mine. But we had these giant monotypic stands of cane. And this cane was really important habitat for multiple extinct species like passenger pigeons and the Carolina parakeet. And pioneers, they hated this stuff. This stuff would be so thick that instead of traveling in the roadway, they would have to travel in the creek bed. Bears would call it home, all types of birds. This is Bachman sparrow habitat. And let me tell you, it grows thick. This is from maybe Mississippi, maybe I'm misattributing. But you can see there is a man on a horse, and way above his head is bamboo. This is native bamboo. So that paints a very different picture from what we've been told both culturally and scientific literature. That the Southeast is not, in fact, a hardwood deciduous forest, but rather it is a mosaic of landscapes. Rather, we had forests, but we also had 50 to 60% land coverage of grassland communities all throughout the Southeast, and that they worked together, and that they were created some of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. Unfortunately, almost half of endangered ecosystems in the East are grasslands. And if you expand that to include woodlands, which we at SGI do, because they are dominated by grassy undergrowth, then we're talking about 70% of systems in the Southeast that are endangered are grassland systems. These grasslands are the heart, the soul of biodiversity in the Southeast, creating a biodiversity hotspot that had just recently been recognized. These systems are so incredibly diverse that you can see them pop up on this map in these bright green areas as super high levels of endemism. Species occur in these grasslands that don't occur anywhere else. This is a last of its kind prairie near Charlotte, North Carolina. Longleaf pine savanna on the right. In this 1 metered square, we detected 52 species. 1 metered square. Incredible biodiversity. We're just talking plant life. We're not talking about invertebrates. We're not talking about vertebrates. 52 species. These grasslands in the Southeast, they occur on a continuum. They weren't just prairie or just savanna or just forest. There's a gradient there. So, prairie. We all know prairie. Here is a prairie of the last holdouts of the Pennyroyal Plain. The only place this exists anymore is Fort Campbell Army Base. And that is a picture of a 1,000-acre prairie that houses some of the last remnants of this once 3 million acres of contiguous prairie. Here's another one. This picture is really unique from Arkansas. You can see those little mounds in the back called nepkas. These prairies are super diverse, and those little mounds not only support different plant life than the lower areas, but different vertebrate life as well. It's a blackjack prairie on Fort Campbell Army Base. You can see all those oaks back there. They are blackjack oaks. And then you have this sea of prairie grasses and forbs. Then we, of course, have glades on that spectrum. These glades and woodlands support edaphic conditions. You can see them extremely diverse, but every picture of a glade, you look at that back wall and the savanna's gone that it's supposed to be inset in. And then some of my favorite ecosystems, savannas. Here's a blackland savanna from Arkansas. Look at all those echinaceas blooming. Longleaf pine savanna from North Carolina. And then one of my favorite, an oak savanna in Trigg County, Kentucky. This could be any spot in Iowa. If I wiped away where it was from, this could be around Red Rock. This can be pretty much anywhere in Southeast Iowa. The communities that we're talking are not that different, and they exist. And this is a pine savanna in the Black Belt of Alabama, last of its kind, Geiger, Alabama. Then we had woodlands. And this will tell you why at SGI, to us, these woodlands are grassland systems. Sure, there's tree cover and there's canopy cover and there's shade, but that entire understory with dappled light is dominated by forbs and grasses. This is a grassland system on Catoosa WMA in Tennessee. And then, of course, I get a bad rap for maybe hating forests. I promise everybody here, I love forests. And we did have some forests. Here's an old-growth mesic hardwood forest in the gorge of Fall Creek Falls. Now, you'll notice something about this picture that will tell us something about land position and ecology and geology. These forests occur in very steep ravines, northern slopes, cold, moist environments. Now, I can tell you, as someone who's now lived in the South for 6 years, majority of the South is not that. It is rolling, undulating, flat ground that when fire was ignited would have ripped from river to river with nothing to stop it. So then we're looking at it and we say, okay, 300 million acres of open grassy and grassy woodlands. What happened to them? Well, our savannas became closed canopied forests in the absence of bison and fire. If you haven't realized, I did a mean trick here and flipped this. So this is what we encountered as a savanna. This is post-intervention. Same tree, same spot. Beautiful, fertile meadow. Well, someone got the idea to plant fescue. The majority of our wet meadows planted to non-native grasses that are honestly terrible for grazers. Then our gorgeous prairies became crop field. We all know that story. The agriculture business in the Southeast, and I'm not anti-farmer. I love farmers. I work with them every day. The agriculture business in the Southeast and the loblolly business was built upon the graves of grasslands. We need agriculture, but I'm also in the belief that we can do things in a way where we can have our farms and we can produce corn and soybean and products like loblollies, but we can have our prairies and our savannas too. There's a better way to do it. So where did they all go besides that? Because right now, when it comes to remnants, we're either left with it's too rocky to sink a drill through or plant loblollies in, or too wet. Well, by 1750, all the grasslands east of that line, or the majority of them, were degraded beyond recognition. By the 1800s, Daniel Boone and all his friends came across the Cumberland Gap, and they started really hunting out and changing over and settling the interior grasslands. 1860, we made it as far as Louisiana. 1930, we continued to progress west in the ever pursuit of progress. And then 1950s, we started getting into the more of the interior grasslands. And I'd like to stand up here today and say, oh, well, we stopped them in the 1950s. We did it, guys. But we didn't. Every single day I work, I'm getting calls of small, isolated remnants, half an acre, 2 acres, that are subjected to random chaotic events. They're subjected to development. They're herbicide, to becoming crop fields. Last year, I hosted a conference in Tennessee called Grassland Remnant Identification and Management. The entire conference, I built up taking everyone to this one remnant, the best remnant left in Middle Tennessee. And I made a mistake. I didn't visit the remnant the day before. I brought an entire bus of 100 people out there. And I stepped off this bus, and my 2 colleagues, Dr. Dwayne Estes and Theo Witzel, stepped off with me, and I can't say what we said into a microphone. Because a roadside crew had come along thinking they were doing good, and they sprayed the remnant. The best remnant that existed in Middle Tennessee was about 100 yards long and 20 yards wide along the side of a road. And they sprayed it because they saw some pines growing in it, and they thought that would be bad for the roadside. Every day, we are losing these remnants. These remnants are living on the edge, like this prairie remnant in a power line corridor that you can see is maybe 50 to 100 yards across, just waiting for the power line company to decide weeds aren't good enough in our power line corridor and spraying them out. What are we losing with these grasslands of the South? Well, I'm sure it's no surprise to you that grassland birds are in steep decline. I can stand up here and cite the Cornell metrics for you, but I'm going to guess that you guys know those pretty well. The American bumblebee. We want to talk about like being patriotic. The American bumblebee is extirpated from 7 states. Monarchs are in steep decline, along with all other grassland fauna. But we're losing other things as well with these southeastern grasslands. We're losing our culture and our history. The things that our ancestors encountered as they walked or rode wagons across the East are disappearing. And if we don't stop that, that story will never be told. We lose tons in economics, whether that's agricultural economics, because we're not utilizing things like prairie buffer strips in our agricultural fields, or it's hunting economics, or it's bird watching economics. We are losing the entire suite of conservation and ecotourism in the Southeast because we are allowing these ecosystems to degrade. And then one of the ones that means the most to me is biodiversity. We are staring ecological collapse in the eyes. We've extirpated prairie chickens from the Southeast for the most part. Heath hen, extinct. Passenger pigeon, extinct. Carolina parakeet, extinct. Bison, functionally extinct in the East. Bobwhite quail are estimated in most populations to decline by 50% every 10 years. 1 in 3 reptiles and 2 in 3 amphibians are endangered or threatened at the state level. Grassland birds declining by 53%. We know what's happening. My friend always tells a story of like looking back when people were planting honeysuckle and privet and ceresia and say, oh man, but they didn't know. And he would say, no. I guarantee you, someone was screaming. They just didn't listen. So I'm standing up here and I'm screaming and hoping we're listening because we're watching the ecological collapse of our grasslands in the East. Here's a picture of those Hempstead Plains and the heath hen of Long Island, both an extinct grassland and an extinct species. But there's hope. Because 6.5 years ago, an organization was founded out of APSU University who looked to the Midwest and was jealous of the power that Midwestern grasslands have. The enthusiasm of people coming together to care, and decided to say, not only do we know there are grasslands here, but we're going to start working to protect them. That organization was APSU organization called the Southeastern Grassland Institute. 2017, SGI is founded. 2018, they hire their first staff. That was me. 2018, we plant our first prairie reconstruction, 17 acres at Dunbar Cave State Park. 2018, we start and lead a multi-state RCPP program, restoring over thousands of acres of grasslands on private lands in Tennessee and Kentucky. 2019, we grow enough to expand offices. We open our second office in Chattanooga, Tennessee. 2021, we grow again. We expand to Athens, Georgia, in a partnership with UGA. 2022, we acquire our first remnant to purchase and protect it forever, a small 7-acre depressional prairie in Guthrie, Kentucky. It was 6 acres, and we paid way too much money for it, but not enough at the same time. 2023, we start our seed program. My good colleague, Dr. Marcello DeVitis, who worked for Chicago Botanic, leads up our seed program, where we have embarked on not only collecting and seed banking thousands and thousands of seeds from all across the East to protect their genetics from these singular isolated remnants, but also utilize them as expanding into seed increased plots to plant back prairie and savanna. 2023, SGI is awarded $8 million to restore grasslands on 33 national parks in the East. We're just getting started, baby. 2023, SGI is awarded $4 million to map and create a decision tool that shows and supports grasslands in the East. This year, we just opened our 4th and 5th offices in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Roanoke, Virginia. Current day, we have gone and I've got to see and participate in this growth every step of the way. And it's very special to me to have been one of the first employees to go from 3 staff members working all day and all night to go from 30 staff members still working all day and all night. And we have big goals. One of our goals is to restore in each areas that we have sustained offices, tens and thousands of acres of grasslands based on this idea of formulating anchor points. Some of these anchor points are reconstructions that we're planting back in agricultural fields. Some of them are remnants, but all of them are important. You guys want to see what this looks like now? There is hope. So how can you guys help save Southeastern Grasslands? I know you guys have your hands full with Iowa grasslands. And I'll tell you, I have to have everyone go bid on some stuff, because as though I did not get to participate in the Rosberg Warriors, I did participate in the Araldi Warriors. And Dr. Peter Araldi, who's sitting over there, he would pull me every weekend to go restore prairies here in Iowa when I went to school and studied under him. And that was the catalyst for my career, and I didn't even know it. And some days I hated it. And I was like, Pete, why are we out here? It's 100 degrees. We've got a saw and a quadrat, and this sucks. And I'm 19, and I want to go hang out with my friends. But that catalyzed my career into trying to save the grasslands of the Southeast. So make sure you bid today, because programs like the Rosberg Warriors, they are creating the conservationists of the next generation. And some of them won't realize it for 10 years. Of course, one way you guys can help is be an advocate. Just talk to people. When people say, oh, there's only Midwestern grasslands, you say, I know this guy, Jeremy French, that will come scream at you for 40 minutes. And then we always need more donations. We do a good job of raising both private funds, small funds, as well as federal funds. But we have a big goal of restoring grasslands across 24 states, so every single opportunity counts. And then if any of you are ever in the Southeast, come volunteer with me. And if you're not, find Dr. Rosberg or any program in here and get involved. Grassland crisis is not a Southeast crisis. It's not a Midwest crisis. It's an American crisis. So whether you can volunteer for a day or a week or an hour, you are making a direct impact on the flora and fauna of these systems. And with that, thank you. Do we have time for questions? Perfect. Well, that's because all the bison and elk are gone. I joke. I tried. I have a lot of pictures of bison and elk in these slides, but also I can talk for 2 hours, so I cut a bunch of slides last night. We have the goal of, on one of our new acquisitions that we just will acquire officially in July, so don't go tell anybody about it yet, of reconstructing Prairie and putting bison back out there. Yes, sir. Mostly because that system is so understudied, and it is a different grassland system than anything else out there, in that it was likely maintained by mammoths, and there's no more mammoths around. And we've tried experimentally to use goats. We've tried experimentally to do a bunch of things, but you cannot burn that system because that is a azalea system. We're talking very fragile flowers. So right now what we do is we try some goats and we do a lot of chainsaw work of cutting down a lot of woody encroachment. But some of these sites, like a good example is Andrews Bald in Great Smoky Mountain, which we will work to restore. In the span of the past 15 years, it's gone from being about 15 to 20 acres to 7 because of the ever encroaching trees. So in the absence of us putting mammoths back out there, it's a tough fix. It's a tough thing to figure out, but we're working tirelessly to figure out the right thing to really preserve them because they're so unique and special. All the way in the back. Can you say that again for me? Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff there with pollen specifically, I'll say. In one case, we made a misstep with pollen, not us as an SGI, but about 10, 15 years ago, the Baskins wrote a paper citing pollen core data of the Pennyroyal Plain saying, this grassland is of human nature. That's since been refuted. I am not a botanist by profession, although I am a decent botanist. The botanist on our staff is Dr. Dwayne Estes, and that is really his realm. So I'm not entirely qualified to answer that question. But we do look at that, and I defer to Dwayne Estes on that. And we are trying to really diligently understand a lot of these grasslands, some of which you have to point out that I fight this all the time in the East. Well, people will say, that's an early successional community. And I'll say, what? These grasslands are old growth grasslands, some of which have comprised of species that have likely been around since the Miocene. So there's a lot of good stuff. Or the Grace fossil site in eastern Tennessee, where they've dug out heliodermatid lizards. And then you say, well, okay, those don't exist in forests. So there's a lot of good stuff. That is not my strong suit, but there's a ton of research going into that area. Yes, sir.
So how are you finding land?
Every which way. I work a lot with private landowners. We work a lot with easements. I beat the turf and have done everything from door knocking landowners that I'm like, oh, that's a remnant, to working with NRCS and USDA to apply programs like RCPP, which is a Farm Bill program geared towards restoring grasslands. And we're also working with all our public land entities to do things like at Fort Campbell Army Base. We've got one of the only populations of Silphium laciniatum in the state of Tennessee, where we've agreed and worked with them to not only help restore or advocate on behalf of them restoring their prairies, but collect seeds from them so that we can restore prairies off of the site. So we do a mix of working with states. We've got multiple state parks that have restored prairies, working with game lands or wildlife agencies to really pressure and push for public land grasslands, as well as just working with everyday landowners. And sometimes that's a landowner calling me and saying, hey, I have a fescue pasture. I've seen what you did. I want something special. Come work with me. And sometimes that's us working with larger producers or doing land acquisition or working with in CRP. So we try and really do everything that we can and meet every landowner where they are, whether they're an agricultural producer, a rancher, or they're just someone who wants something pretty on their property. We've got tons of knowledge gaps. There's not enough time. I'm a single person. There's not enough researchers in the East looking to understand some of these grasslands. Some of those knowledge gaps are slowly being filled. One of them that's recently come to light to us, which is valuable in the Midwest, is that for the interior grasslands, understanding the fire regimes was really important. And for a long time, as most people did, we lit our fires in the spring. Most of that research came out of the coastal plain saying, hey, you should have spring fire. Now we realize when we look back at tree core data, we look at cultural data, that these systems almost exclusively burned in the fall and winter, with only in the past 500 years, 5 to 10% of fire occurring in the springtime. There's tons of data gaps about individual species, like Paysonia perforata, which is a species I am in love with because it's the first species that I discovered a federal new EO for. That is a species that we don't understand that likely inhabited bison wallows and bison trails, and is now only exists in 5 populations in the world. And understanding the community that surrounded that is really important. There's extensive research that needs to be done both culturally and scientifically. And every year, I mean, we have a list of SGI of just species that need to be sorted out that we say, that's probably 12 species. A good example of that is Coreopsis debilis, or what many of us might know as another name. But we look at that species and say, well, morphologically and genetically, that could be multiple species, but we just don't have the time or the resources to sort out all those data gaps. And there's tons more out there. The thing that the Midwest I get jealous about oftentimes is when it comes to prairie reconstruction, the Midwest knows a lot. The Southeast is still figuring it out. So simple studies like figuring out what is the prime seeding mechanism for these agricultural reconstructions, what's the prime site restoration, what's the prime fire return interval. These are all things that are really important. And then there's so much stuff in the seed world too, because we have such limited resources when it comes to seed of these really small isolated genetic populations. How do we collect those seeds and use them in an ethical and right ways without creating genetic dilution to replant thousands of acres of prairie? That was a really long answer, but that was a really good question. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really good question and good thing to point out. I shared 2 pictures today of Fort Campbell Army Base. One of those pictures is in the impact zone that has been mortared and bombarded every day since the 30s until today. Today it is getting bombarded. And it is a 5-mile by 5-mile prairie. And it is not perfect, but it is really unique. We see a lot of what we consider high conservative species existing in that prairie, both botanically and from wildlife. There's black bears that just every day are getting mortars chucked at them, and you see them and they're happier than like they don't even care. But that community is very different than right across the road where we have a prairie that is not experiencing that high return of fire. And the same thing with cane breaks. There's cane breaks in the impact that they're thick and they're 40 feet tall, look really healthy. They're just like an anomaly in my brain at times. And then you go to a cane break that's right off the impact and it's like wimpy, wimpy, wimpy. There's so many different things there that's really interesting. But something that I'm really excited about is we are embarking potentially on the opportunity to utilize drones to entirely survey the impact. The impact's an active impact, so you can't walk out there because there's 40-millimeter mortar shells everywhere. But the communities do have some differences, and they're extremely unique and interesting. Thank you, guys.